Iran launched Nasrallah missiles, crippling the security ministry, according to Aviv. Israel quickly dropped 12,000 bombs to relieve the siege. Greetings to our viewers, U.S. Sphere. The Middle East is being swept into a new whirlwind of war with increasing intensity as Iran and Israel repeatedly strike each other with fierce attacks using missiles, drones, and large-scale airstrikes. The regional atmosphere is no longer merely tense, but has shifted to a state of direct confrontation, where each side wants to prove that it is still capable of crushing the other with overwhelming firepower and an unwavering will. According to the sources mentioned, the Israeli army said it detected multiple missile launches from Iran, causing air raid sirens to blare in a number of areas in central and northern Israel, including Jerusalem and Haifa. The rapid explosions in the skies over Jerusalem caused people to rush to shelters in panic. Although the Israeli rescue forces said they had not received any immediate emergency requests after the attack, the mere fact that key areas were placed on red alert was enough to show that the situation was escalating to an extremely dangerous level. Conversely, Iran announced that it had deployed UAVs to directly attack the headquarters of Israel's Ministry of Internal Security in the western Jerusalem area. This is no longer a symbolic retaliation, but a direct punch to the heart of Israel's security apparatus. Iran described this as retaliation after a number of high-ranking Iranian officials and dozens of sailors were killed in previous attacks. This includes the attack on the Iris Dena warship and the assassination of a high-ranking intelligence official in an airstrike, allegedly orchestrated by Israel. Let's peel back the layers of this news report. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any important developments. Iran launches Nasrallah missiles for the first time, targeting Israel's vital infrastructure. The most shocking development in this whole affair is Iran's announcement that it has deployed the Nasrallah missile system in combat for the first time. This detail carries immense symbolic significance because it shows that Iran not only wants to inflict military damage on Israel, but also wants to send a defiant message by associating a new weapon with a name that carries special weight in the regional confrontation. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC, said it has launched a new wave of attacks with a barrage of precision-guided missiles targeting what Thean considers to be the strategic backbone of Israel. This list includes oil refineries in Haifa and Ashdod, crucial energy hubs, along with numerous other security facilities and military support centers. If these attacks cause the damage described, their impact will not only be on the military front, but could also directly affect social psychology, the energy supply chain, and confidence in Israel's defenses. What is frightening is not just the number of targets being targeted, but the way Iran is selecting its targets. Tehran isn't simply firing at symbolic locations, they're trying to show they can reach the enemy's most vital points. When an oil refinery, a security center, or a logistical link is within firing range, the message is clear. Nowhere is truly safe anymore. Iran's promotion of this strike as a turning point also shows that they want to prove that even under heavy attack, they are still capable of tactical innovation, changing their attack methods and launching surprises that can force the opponent to recalculate the entire game. This is not the image of a side that only knows how to cower and endure blows. This is an Iran that wants to show the whole region that it still has fangs, and the next bites could be much deeper. The U.S. is getting more deeply involved. Washington is preparing for a terrible money-burning war. While the battlefield is raging, Washington is also sending strong signals that the U.S. is not standing idly by. According to the content mentioned, Defense Secretary Pitt Heat stated that the U.S. is still on track to achieve its goals in the war with Iran, although he did not specify a time frame for ending the conflict. This statement can be interpreted in many ways, but the clearest point is that the U.S. is preparing for a prolonged, unpredictable confrontation that could escalate further. Mr. Hex also acknowledged that Iran entered the conflict with a large amount of weapons. This means that Tehran has not been defeated, as many optimistic assessments had previously suggested. If Iran still has its stockpile of UAV missiles and counterattack capabilities, Washington will not be able to end the game with a few airstrikes and declare victory. Instead, the U.S. risks being drawn into a spiral of attrition where each passing day consumes enormous amounts of finances, ammunition, and political pressure. More notably, The Pentagon is said to have asked the White House to approve a plan to present to Congress for over $200 billion in funding for a military campaign against Iran. That's a number that would shock anyone. Because when the war budget soars to this level, it reflects the reality that the U.S. no longer considers this a short-term campaign. This is a preparation for a confrontation that could cost as much as the largest military campaigns in recent years. At the same time, Washington continues to maintain a tough stance on the nuclear issue. The position is that President Donald Trump will not accept Iran moving closer to possessing nuclear weapons. This transforms the current conflict from just missiles and airstrikes into a battle to shape the power order for years to come. You are watching in-depth analysis of Washington's strategy on U.S. sphere. If you are interested in the globally impactful economic and military moves by the United States, please take a few seconds to read on. Press the subscribe button and turn on notifications. Your support is what motivates us to continue creating the highest quality and most objective content. 5 o'clock. Once the U.S. believes that Iran still has the ability to recover or restart its strategic capabilities, any current attacks will not only target immediate military objectives, but also aim to eliminate the future of the Taliban. Israel dropped over 12,000 bombs, turning Iran into a fiery battlefield. While Iran tries to prove it still has the ability to retaliate, Israel wants to prove the opposite, that it is capable of crushing its opponent with a devastating air campaign. According to the statement mentioned in the content, Israel said it had conducted nearly 590 sorties, over 8,500 attacks, and dropped over 12,000 bombs on Iranian territory. This number alone is enough to show that the intensity of the fighting has far exceeded the scope of a limited response. Israel's strikes are believed to have focused on Iran's air defense, early warning, and missile launch systems. According to the description, approximately 85% of Iran's air defense capabilities and 60% of its launchers have been neutralized. While these figures should be viewed cautiously, if the logic of the operation is correct, Israel is trying to create a combat space where Iran loses its ability to cover the skies, loses its early warning capabilities, and is forced to react in chaos. However, the reality on the battlefield shows that Iran has not yet silenced its guns. Iran continues to launch ballistic missile attacks against Israel. Most are intercepted, but some still cause localized damage, such as fires at oil refineries in 2 phases due to missile debris. This shows that even when severely damaged, Iran still has the capability to make Israel pay a price. It is at this point that the war becomes particularly dangerous. Israel can strike harder, deeper, and more accurately. But Iran still proves that it has not been completely stripped of its claws. As a result, both sides have reason to continue escalating. Israel believes that more fighting is needed to break the last remaining resistance. Iran believes that as long as they can fire, they can still maintain their deterrence. And between those two logics, the risk of a prolonged war is entirely possible. Energy infrastructure held hostage in the Gulf is facing a new seismic shift. One of the most dangerous developments of this conflict is that the war has spilled straight into the energy sector. Iran warns it will not hold back if the U.S. and Israel continue to attack its energy infrastructure. That statement is not an empty threat. According to the original article, after Israel attacked Iran's large gas field at Bushehr and caused a major fire, Iran quickly retaliated with attacks on energy infrastructure in Qatar, Kashmir, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. This is an extremely dangerous escalation because when the war reaches gas fields, refineries, export routes, and LNG facilities, its impact is no longer confined to the 2 warring countries. It immediately puts the whole world on high alert. Oil prices rise, energy markets shake, import-dependent economies begin to worry, and Gulf countries are forced to reconsider all their security strategies. Many European countries and Japan have condemned the attacks on commercial ships and the de facto blockade in the Strait of Hormuz, with a joint statement calling for an immediate halt to attacks on civilian infrastructure, especially oil and gas, while leaving open the possibility of coordinating with oil-producing countries to stabilize the market. This shows that the biggest worry right now is not just the bombs falling in the Middle East, but the domino effect spreading throughout the entire global economy. When energy becomes the target, war enters an extremely brutal chapter. A blow to an oil refinery doesn't just set a few tanks on fire. It can ignite a price crisis, disrupt the supply chain, push inflation higher, and trigger political pressure in a host of countries. Iran understands that. Israel understands that. And precisely because both understand, the game becomes even more terrifying. Iran threatens to unleash more surprises. The message is directed straight at Washington. In the context of escalating hostilities, statements from Iran are increasingly taking on a show of force. Major General Ali Abdullahi, commander of the Qatam Alania Central Command, declared that Iran always has surprises in store for the U.S. This statement was made while Tehran claimed to have damaged a US F-3A-15 fighter jet, forcing it to make an emergency landing at a base in the region. The U.S. confirmed that an F-35 had to make an emergency landing while on combat duty in Iranian airspace, and stated that the pilot was safe, and the incident was under investigation. Technically, this may not be proof that Iran shot down an F-35, but in terms of propaganda and psychological warfare, Iran has immediately turned this incident into a symbol of its ability to surprise. For Iran, simply causing a top-of-the-line U.S. stealth fighter to malfunction in combat airspace is enough material to send the message that Washington is not invulnerable. This is extremely important, because in any modern war, the image of power is often worth almost as much as actual power. If Iran makes the public believe that they can touch the F-35, they are creating the feeling that the U.S. combat system can also be penetrated. Tehran also emphasized that they have only used a portion of their power and will retaliate without lifting a finger if their energy infrastructure continues to be attacked. This opens up the possibility that upcoming strikes may not only be limited to Israeli territory, but may extend further into U.S. military bases and networks in the region. And once that message has been made public, Washington will be forced to put its forces on the highest alert. Iran is offering a ceasefire, but behind it is a strategy of attrition. A very noteworthy development is that Iran has not signaled surrender. On the contrary, Tehran is trying to set up a new bargaining position. According to the stated content, Iran declares its readiness to fight until the U.S. and Israel guarantee that they will not attack them in the future. In other words, Tehran not only wants to end a war, they want to buy a strategic space of security after the war. This is an extremely dangerous mindset for the adversary because it shows that Iran is willing to make a big trade-off in the present to gain a deterrent advantage for the future. Some sources even suggest that Tehran considers the current conflict a life-threatening situation. Therefore, the core objective is to restore deterrence capabilities so that the adversary will not dare to repeat military action in the future. That is why Iran might accept entering a protracted war of attrition, provided that they eventually force the U.S. and Israel to be wary. Some assessments suggest that Iran has two parallel calculations. On the one hand, they want to end the hostilities because the losses are too great. On the other hand, they want to make the U.S. and the world economy pay a heavy enough price so that neither side wants to engage in this kind of war again. That is how Tehran elevates the threat level from a regional confrontation to a global headache. In the scenario where Washington withdraws from the war, Iran could use that to declare a psychological victory. But even if the U.S. backs down, Tehran could still continue to attack Israel, which they consider the direct cause of the conflict. This is where Trump's dilemma becomes complicated. It's difficult to withdraw, but it's also not easy to continue fighting to suppress Iran because each escalation pushes the world closer to an energy crisis, a shipping crisis, and widespread political instability. The Strait of Hormuz has become a ticking time bomb, and the whole world is holding its breath, watching this vital shipping lane. If there is one hotspot capable of causing global chaos in just a few days, it is the Strait of Hormuz. The article shows that Iran has the ability to turn this shipping lane into a tool for strategic pressure. Threats to shipping through the strait are forcing the U.S. to prepare naval escort forces and even plan to clear mines. According to the assessments mentioned, Iran continues to load and export oil through the strait, with at least 10 oil and gas tankers passing through fully loaded. This means the West hasn't completely blocked this route, but it still lets the world know that they can do it at any time. That's the real pressure. There was no need to completely shut down the Hormuz. Simply creating the feeling that it could explode at any moment was enough for Tehran to shake the market. More dangerously, Mine clearing was cited as an existential risk. A mine clearing operation at Hus, if it occurred, could last for weeks, be extremely costly, and put American sailors in direct danger. This is not just a military story. It's also a blow that forces Washington and its allies to expend enormous resources just to keep a sea lane from being blocked. The geopolitical consequences of a crisis in the Gulf are also significant. It could weaken the U.S. alliance with Gulf states and push these countries to rebalance their relations with Iran to protect their survival interests. In other words, even when team is under intense pressure, they still have cards strong enough to make their opponents pay the price. Unidentified UAVs appear over U.S. bases. The war spreads to Washington. A particularly noteworthy detail is the information about unidentified UAVs appearing over the U.S. Army's Fort Magna base in Washington, D.C., the residence of Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Pentagon leader Pete Hegseth. Although the origin of the UAV has not been determined, the event itself has created a very different feeling. War is no longer just far away. It is casting its shadow right at the heart of American power. The fact that U.S. officials are reportedly considering changing the residences of high-ranking officials shows the sensitivity of the situation. The Fort Magna, located very close to the White House, is a location of special symbolic and strategic significance. Therefore, the mere appearance of a strange object above this area immediately sends a worrying security message. No one is sure what it is, where it came from, or what its purpose is. But the worry is already there. Meanwhile, the conflict is exposing the increasingly clear strategic differences between the U.S. and Israel. Israel seems to want to continue fighting until the Iranian regime is weakened to the point of collapse. The U.S., however, must consider the enormous consequences if that actually happens. A chaotic Iran could lead to civil war, regional instability, migration flows, and security commitments that Washington might ultimately bear. Israel may want to fight longer because they see an opportunity to cripple their adversary for the long term. But the U.S. must consider the financial costs, political pressure, and the risk of getting bogged down in an even greater international crisis. This is the divergence of fanaticism. This makes the U.S.-Israel alliance, although still closely coordinated, no longer completely unified in its goals. The U.S. finalized a $16 billion arms deal, and the Gulf region faced a life-or-death choice. While the war showed no signs of cooling down, the U.S. approved arms sales worth more than $16 billion to the UAE and Qatar. This move shows that Washington is not only focusing on the current battlefield, but is also restructuring the balance of power in the entire Gulf region. The deals include bombs, missiles, air defense radar, and missile defense systems, everything needed for a region that fears being drawn deeper into and out of war. Notably, the U.S. use of emergency clauses to expedite these deals means shortening the normal oversight process, which reflects a very clear mindset. Washington wants to act quickly to reassure allies, tighten the regional security network, and ensure that Gulf states are not left vulnerable to Iranian firepower. But the Gulf states faced a difficult choice. They condemned the attacks on their energy facilities, but were not ready to go to war with the U.S. and Israel. They wanted protection, but did not want to become a battlefield. They wanted to maintain relations with Washington, but also understood that if the region continued to burn, no one could remain aloof forever. At the end of that picture, there remains a large shadow cast by Iran's nuclear program. Assessments of the late Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei's role in keeping the nuclear program restrained only complicate matters further. If Iran feels cornered, will it continue to exercise restraint? If the old centers of power are broken, who will control Iran's next steps? That is a question that worries both the region and the West. And that is why this war is far more dangerous than what is being portrayed in the news. It is not just airstrikes, missile launches, or tough rhetoric. It is a clash that could reshape the balance of power in the Middle East, shake up global energy markets, deepen the differences between allies, and usher in a period of instability whose consequences could last for years. The whole situation now shows that neither side really wants to back down. Iran wants to prove that it hasn't fallen and is still capable of making its opponent pay a heavy price. Israel wants to fight to the end to stifle the immediate threat. The U.S. wants to control the game, but is being drawn into increasingly complex problems. And the world is standing on the sidelines, holding its breath as it watches each missile tear through the sky. Each oil refinery burst into flames, each oil tanker passing through homos as if walking on a razor's edge. On the night of judgment of the 34th Lion, Israeli air defenses were torn apart. For years, the world had been fascinated by the technological myths of Tel Aviv. They revered Iron Dome, David's sling, and arrow as immortal shields, multi-layered defense systems that the West always hyped as impenetrable. But on the third night of last month, the 17th, Tehran forced the whole world to confront a stark truth. Those billion-dollar shields were nothing but useless iron frames when confronted with the indomitable will and strategic intelligence of a resilient people. The night of judgment did not begin with explosions, but with a chilling silence on Israeli radar screens. Tehran did not choose a massive attack, but deployed a sophisticated phantom strategy. Hundreds of cheap decoy UAVs domestically produced by the ERGC swarmed the skies like a hive of bees, overwhelming and disorienting the entire enemy air defense system. Each Tamiya interceptor missile, worth tens of thousands of US dollars, was forced to be launched blindly to destroy these cheap decoy targets. This was a battle of wits in which Israel fell into a trap from the very first minutes. While the launch platforms were busy dealing with false signals, Tehran's real attacks silently appeared from the horizon. The reality on the streets of Tel Aviv revealed everything. Videos recorded by the residents themselves showed the clear helplessness of the defense system. The Iron Dome, originally designed to deal with simple targets, was completely breached by the complex flight paths and overwhelming speed of the Iranian attacks. The interception rate, once boasted as a source of pride, collapsed into meaningless numbers. The red streaks tearing through the sky were not successful interceptions, but Iranian warheads heading straight for critical military targets. The alarm sirens blared incessantly, marking the collapse of a technological illusion built over many years. Israel poured billions of US dollars into building a shield based on American technology, but they misjudged the nature of modern warfare. Technology cannot salvage a flawed strategy, especially when facing a sovereign, deep-rooted, and capable opponent like Iran. Unlike previous campaigns by the US-Israel coalition in Gaza or Lebanon, Iran's strike was highly selective and precise. The targets locked onto included the Nevatim and Tenov air bases and key intelligence centers. That night, the F-35 fighter jet hangars turned into a sea of fire, burning down the symbol of Israeli Air Force power even while it was still on the ground. It was not impenetrable when they decided to act. The penetration of strategic bases from the outset completely paralyzed their ability to counterattack, forcing the enemy to huddle in a passive defensive state. While Israel was in chaos, Washington's response was cautious. American early warning systems were unable to provide any effective support. This was because even the advanced American radar systems in the region were being jammed by Tehran's new electronic warfare technology. This made the U.S. realize that if it intervened further, its forces could also become direct targets. The Pentagon's silence was an implicit acknowledgement that control of the Middle Eastern skies was no longer in its hands. That night was not only a military defeat, but also a direct blow to the prestige of the entire Western defense industry. The world has clearly seen that air defense systems touted as invulnerable are actually only effective against weaker opponents. When faced with a resilient and technologically advanced Iran, all those layers of defense become meaningless. Tehran has sent a strong message that strength lies not in the value of weapons, but in courage and strategy. The illusion has completely collapsed, and the images in the Tel Aviv sky are just the prelude to an even more brutal phase. When the shield has been breached, that is when Iran will prepare to unleash its strategic cards, turning the entire battlefield into a new chapter. Iran launches fourth-generation missiles, a masterpiece of self-reliance. If Part 1 was an indictment of the failure of Western technology, then Part 2 is a chilling verdict on the skies of Israel and a powerful affirmation of Iran's status as a military superpower. Last night, Iran not only launched missiles but also launched the pride and intelligence of a nation that has never been subdued. The fourth-generation super missiles, the Ka-Sekin-2 and Fatah series, have officially appeared, turning the skies of the Middle East into a technological showcase where the U.S. and Israel are merely helpless onlookers. Why do top military experts at the Pentagon have to admit they cannot intercept them? The answer lies in the new generation Meravi orbital technology developed by Iran. Unlike traditional ballistic missiles that fly along a trajectory, It can be predicted that Theran warheads are equipped with intelligent guidance systems, allowing for sudden changes in direction with extremely high acceleration right in the atmosphere. They swerve and zigzag like ghosts in the air, rendering all the calculation algorithms of Patriot or Arrow obsolete. This is a direct challenge to the entire Western military computing platform. Iran has proven that, by mastering independent guidance technology, it can completely control the battlefield. Not only are these super missiles highly versatile, but they also achieve incredible speeds of up to mx-15, shortening the time from firing to hitting the target to just a few minutes. At this speed, the plasma layer formed around the missile body, making it almost invisible to shortwave radar. Israeli air defense stations only managed to detect a streak of light before the entire area was shaken by the immense destructive force. There was no time to react, no chance to intercept. That was the cold precision of a strike, calculated down to the second. What amazes the world is not only the power, but also the origin of these weapons. Throughout decades of sanctions, Iran has turned pressure into motivation to build a completely self-sufficient defense industry. The new generation of missiles does not depend on Western components. Every component, from microchips to fuel, is developed by Iran itself. This is a strong affirmation that sanctions cannot subdue a nation with will and vision. While Israel has to rely on external aid, IAGC's production facilities continue to operate, producing effective weapons at a much lower cost. This self-reliance is the foundation of true strength. Unlike campaigns that cause heavy casualties among civilians in the region, Iran's attacks demonstrate high precision with extremely low error rates. The targets chosen are key air bases, ammunition depots, and military command centers. Iran does not need to destroy large areas, but focuses on neutralizing the enemy's combat capabilities. This is a calculated and controlled approach, clearly demonstrating discipline in warfare. Each missile launched carries a clear message that any destabilizing action will have consequences. Another important factor that makes it difficult for the U.S. is Iran's use of an independent guidance system that does not rely on GPS. When jamming efforts were deployed, the missile maintained its precise trajectory, demonstrating a high level of electronic countermeasures resistance. This forced Washington to confront a new reality. They no longer held absolute control over the technology. A new generation of weapons emerged, completely changing the way modern warfare is conducted. The successive attacks have put Israel on the defensive, while pressure spreads throughout the region. And while the sky is still ablaze with streaks of fire from the new generation of missiles in the Gulf of Oman, another development is quietly unfolding, signaling a profound shift in the balance of naval power. The Gulf of Oman was shaken by the humiliating retreat of the American naval superpower. World military history has just added another dark page for the U.S. Navy, but it is also an epic that deeply reflects the courage and will of the Iranian people. Let's put aside the glamorous images of invincible carrier strike groups, because in the Omani Sea, the actual strategic situation was completely different. Washington's multi-billion-dollar floating fortresses had to retreat and withdraw under pressure from a well-prepared battle formation. Why were aircraft carriers like the USS Abraham Lincoln or USS Theodore Roosevelt forced to change course as the situation escalated? The answer lies in the anti-access/area denial network that Iran had quietly built over many years. The Gulf of Oman is no longer a unilaterally controlled space, but has become a heavily protected area under the A2AD doctrine. Long-range anti-ship missile systems and anti-ship ballistic missile variants are densely deployed along the coast, forming a fire network capable of covering the entire area. These systems not only attack individually, but are also capable of coordinated grouping, creating pressure that exceeds the limits of ship-based defense systems. When dense warning signals appeared on radar, all traditional response scenarios became ineffective. In that context, the decision to withdraw was made to avoid the risk of heavy losses. The Pentagon described this as a tactical adjustment, but observational data showed that the speed of leaving the area was pushed to the maximum. The task forces quickly moved away from the threat zone towards safer areas in the Indian Ocean. This move sent a clear message to the regional situation. When real pressure arises, the top priority remains preserving forces. It also means that allies must face the reality that support is not always absolute. For decades, aircraft carriers have been seen as a symbol of global deterrence, but against a well-prepared adversary like Iran, The effectiveness of that symbol is being questioned. Iran's electronic warfare systems also play a significant role in heavily jamming communications and navigation channels, impairing the coordination capabilities of the U.S. Navy. Under those conditions, maintaining the position became risky, forcing units to choose safer options. The Gulf of Anan thus completely changed the balance of control, becoming an area where all operations had to be carefully calculated. In contrast to the withdrawal of external forces, Iranian naval units maintained flexible control with escort ships, speedboats, and small submarines. The highly mobile and dispersed tactics allowed them to closely monitor all activity at the entrance to the Hous Strait and the surrounding area. This was a pragmatic approach that relied not on scale, but on effectiveness and suitability to the combat environment. Creating enough pressure to force the enemy to retreat without direct combat demonstrated a high level of deterrence in the Gulf of O, which also had broader consequences for the base system in the area. As the main naval forces move away, the outposts become more vulnerable to any changes. Countries in the region must therefore reassess their level of dependence and security strategies. This change is not only military in nature, but also reflects a deeper shift in beliefs and the balance of power. What is happening shows that absolute advantage no longer belongs to the side with the greatest resources, but to the side with the right strategy and high adaptability. From a broader perspective, this is a sign that the old order is gradually changing places in a new balanced structure. As the aircraft carriers gradually disappear from the horizon, the question is no longer who is retreating, but who is reshaping the rules of the game, and how Iran can maintain the morale and strategic capacity to create such a decisive turning point. Self-esteem is being pushed to the limit. Iran's wall and the burning of the temple. In military strategy, there exists a realm called the death zone, where people, when pushed to their limits, will unleash their most powerful survival instincts. Last night, the world witnessed this realm firsthand in Iran. When the U.S.-Israel alliance used every means from assassination and sanctions to threats of annihilation, they inadvertently awakened a profound power called national pride. The temple-burning campaign that Teen launched was not an impulsive act, but the culmination of willpower and courage, a calculated choice of a nation determined to protect its dignity against external pressure. Look at the depth of Iran's history, an ancient civilization with a tradition of resilience. The Iranian people carry within them the spirit of generations who have overcome countless challenges to protect their sovereignty. For decades, they were besieged and pressured simply for steadfastly upholding self-determination. As the ships built their rampage and threats increased, Tehran understood that half-hearted solutions were no longer effective. The burning of the temple was triggered with a clear message. Without peace and sovereignty, there would be no stability for any side. This is how a nation demonstrates its right to self-defense when it is forced into a situation where it has no other choice. The West often relies on material interests to maintain its influence, but Iran possesses an unbuyable element: spirit and will. Those who operate the defense and attack systems are well aware of their responsibilities to their families, country, and honor. The burning of temples demonstrates a willingness to suffer losses in exchange for weakening the enemy's power structure in the region. This is what makes traditional calculations difficult to apply, because when the enemy is not dominated by fear, all deterrence scenarios become ineffective. When self-esteem is pushed to its limit, each individual becomes a link in a vast defense system, and each terrain becomes a strategic advantage. For years, fear was used as a tool of pressure. But now, the psychological balance has shifted. Decisive actions have broken down psychological barriers and sent a message that willpower can change the course of events when attacks are launched. They are not only military in nature, but also represent a desire for independence. The lamplighting strategy affirms that sovereignty is a core value that cannot be compromised. Iran is not only acting in its own interests, but is also exerting broader influence over countries seeking a path to self-determination. In this context, international support tends to shift as more parties recognize the nature of the conflict. Iran is seen as a nation steadfast in defending its territory, while its adversary faces much criticism for its approach. The very element of righteousness provides a layer of moral protection that helps maintain internal stability. The difference between the sides is also reflected in their fighting motivations. One side defends its country, the other pursues broader strategic goals. In the reality of the battlefield, the psychological factor often plays a decisive role at crucial moments. The burning of the temple was therefore not only a military strategy, but also a symbol of a shift in geopolitical approach. It offered a lesson in self-respect and the ability to withstand pressure. Iran chose the difficult but principled path instead of accepting dependence in exchange for temporary stability. The deployment of advanced weapons systems in this context shows a combination of will and practical capability. A new order is gradually taking shape in which self-determination and balance are more emphasized. Iran is at the forefront of this transition, embracing the challenge to open a different path for the region. That steadfastness is inspiring and shows that when pushed to the limit, nationalism can be the deciding factor. In this context, countries dependent on external patronage will have to confront the question of their own autonomy. As traditional safeguards diminish, new realities emerge, forcing all parties to adapt to a rapidly changing strategic environment. Ladies and gentlemen, what is happening in the Middle East is not simply a clash of missile warheads, but essentially a reshaping of the global power order. When Washington allocates over $200 billion, it's not just about aid, but a calculated risk assessment of the depletion of resources and strategic prestige. Israel may possess a technological advantage, but Iran is demonstrating that in a struggle for survival, self-reliance, and the ability to independently master new technologies are the most unpredictable variables. The logic of modern warfare has changed. Once energy lifelines like the Strait of Hormuz or oil refineries are targeted, the cost will no longer be confined to the borders of the Middle East, but will directly impact the pockets of individual investors and the stability of global supply chains. We are standing at a historical turning point, where every decision from the White House or the Kremlin could trigger a chain reaction of shocks. In today's chaotic information landscape, maintaining a cool head and a multifaceted perspective is paramount. U.S. Sphere. We are committed to always being your trusted partner, helping you peel back the layers of truth behind the dry numbers and war reports. If you find these analyses valuable, please support us by press the subscribe button and the notification bell icon. Your interest is our motivation. U.S. Sphere continue to produce the most in-depth and objective news reports. In your opinion, is America's financial power sufficient to quell the Middle East crisis, or is the world entering an irreversible multipolar era? Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you for taking the time to watch. I am the AI of US. Hello, and see you again in the next analysis segment.